Okay, welcome everybody. We've got our panel ready to discuss and look forward to seeing comments pop up in the chat. So I'm going to go around the table and people are going to introduce themselves quickly, and then we're going to get down to business. So Claire, over to you first.
Hi everyone, so I'm Claire Stanley and I'm an assistant research professor at the Center for Global Health Science and Security at Georgetown University, where I study health systems and infectious disease preparedness and control.
Thank you. Andrew.
Hi everybody, Andy McAbee. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Association of American Veterinary Medical Colleges.
Great, good to see you again. Greg.
I'm Greg Glass. I'm at the University of Florida in the Emerging Pathogens Institute and the Department of Geography.
Great to see you. Barbara.
Hi, I'm Barbara Hahn. I'm an associate scientist and disease ecologist at the Carey Institute of Ecosystem Studies, where we work on predictive analytics using machine learning and data science to make predictions about zoonotic capacity.
Brilliant. Good to see you again, Barbara. Kate Huebner. Is that correct?
Hello. Yes, thank you, Peter. My name is Kate Huebner. I'm a veterinarian at the Food and Drug Administration Center for Veterinary Medicine. I'm in the Office of Surveillance and Compliance.
Brilliant. Laura Kahn.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Kahn. I'm a physician and research scholar at the Program on Science and Global Security at Princeton University, and I'm co-founder of the One Health Initiative.
Joshua Simon. Oh, sorry there. Yeah, okay, it's a different box, my mistake. Mary Wilson.
Hi, Mary Wilson, University of California, San Francisco, Infectious Diseases and Global Health.
And Mark Allard.
Hello, I'm a FDA research microbiologist at FDA, Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition. And I helped build the genome tracker, which is the way FDA tracks foodborne pathogens. And all of that data is deposited at NCBI's Pathogen Detection, a central website for analysis.
All right, let's get the discussion going. We've got about 30 minutes to solve the world. And what we've got to do is think about the predictive approaches that we all know about, that we've heard about, that were talked about today, and how we can get those into One Health operations on the ground, used routinely so as to protect lives, protect trade, protect food security. So let's just start the conversation, please. Can you come up with ideas? We've got to come up with one or two short-term approaches and then one or two long-term approaches on the predictive capabilities. So anybody like to start?
I'm happy to start, and I fully embrace Jonathan Quick's genomic databasing. And so the first thing we can do is start standardizing or following approaches for sharing data in a global way. And that includes organized metadata that describes those isolates in an ontology, which is machine readable and can be helping with the statistical predictions.
Okay.
I would like,
Barbara, I think you were going to say something then.
I was going to start high level and say in the short term, I think that we need a better system for fighting immediate fires that have broken out. And the long term, 10 plus years, we need to start thinking about how to move our predictive capacity upstream, not just the ability to make predictions that we can act on, but then also a pipeline for validating and collecting the data that we need to draw upon quickly in an emergency situation. So I think those are sort of two goals, the short-term goal and the long-term goal. And I think that the capacity building for those goals are different. I agree with you, Mark, that in the short term, the data sharing capacity is absolutely critical. We need to build that pipeline out.
Peter, I'd really like to reinforce what was brought up earlier, that we need a whole lot better data sets, as well as understanding of human movement, human activity in all this, because outbreaks never begin where you're looking for them. I mean, the scale is just way too large. And so the question is, can you, as people have already said, can you pick it up fast enough to make a difference? But that really involves a whole lot of stuff that most of us don't pay a lot of attention to.
Like the wildlife trade, which is really difficult.
Wildlife trade, right. So, I mean, so certainly the issue of general movement that you can document of people, animals, plants, and so forth are there. But as you mentioned, the kind of unseen, unidentified levels of flow, are things that we need to get a handle of on.
Others?
Peter, from an academic standpoint, I might offer a short-term, medium-term, and a long-term goal. The short-term, I think, is pretty doable, and that's to continue to build on the One Health competencies as we develop the One Health workforce. And there's been a lot of work done on this space. Unfortunately, not much in the recent past. But I think we can build on a lot of that work, the core competencies that are needed in this space. And if we add some more on data analytics, big data management, the topics that came up today, to expand and refine those core competencies, that's a pretty short-term achievable goal. In the medium term, I think in terms of building and expanding interprofessional education. We have a pretty robust interprofessional education consortium among the health professions associations, education associations. But I think we need to expand that and include some other non-health professions groups. I was really struck by a paper that Eri Tagami did from the National Academies of Medicine, building on One Health competencies, to find that law is underrepresented in academic One Health programs. So as a lawyer, I can tell you that's shocking to me, because it violates the Full Employment for Lawyers Act. Lawyers are involved in everything that affects human endeavor. And when we talk about things like privacy and social goods and things like that, having lawyers involved in this, I think, is critical. So expanding our definition of interprofessional education and training students to work in team-based environments is really critical. It's going to take a little bit more time. Long-term, Lonnie King mentioned it in his talk yesterday, is building centers of excellence for forecasting and predictive innovations. This is what universities do, bring together people from lots of disciplines, but that may take a little bit of time. You can build on some of the world-class One Health institutes that have already been started, but I think building that way. So those are some approaches we could consider.
Brilliant. And I'm going to ask Laura to speak, who is the most professional among us. She was using the blue hand option, which I failed to spot. So thanks, Laura. If you want to make a comment, please use the raise your hand online, as you all know how to do, I'm sure. Laura.
Yes, thank you very much, Peter. Well, I very much agreed with what John Amusi said earlier, that we really need to look more globally, global policies. These are large societal issues, and we really need to move One Health out of the silos. It's we've created kind of our own silo of One Health. And what I think we need to do is, as a global society, we need to reassess what we value. We need to reassess all that we are doing when we when we look at national wealth. We look at just the gross domestic product. But the gross domestic product looks at a very narrow slice of national wealth. It's looking at goods and services produced in a year. What we need to do is we need to expand our view of what's national wealth to include our natural resources, the purity of our air, our water, the biodiversity, the robustness of our food systems, the biodiversity in our forests, the intactness of our ecosystems. We need to, I think, add a One Health calculus to the gross domestic product, and we need to get the economists involved, because what policymakers care about is money. And we can develop all the best surveillance systems in the world, but as time moves on and people forget about this pandemic, I can assure you that the funds for public health and surveillance will disappear. but we really need to assess our values as a global civilization and what we're doing to the natural world. So it needs to be a much bigger vision than just purely better surveillance. So I recently just published a piece on that, just a thought piece, and I will share it with you. But I think we need to think much bigger and much more outside the box if we are to truly address global pandemics like COVID-19.
Brilliant. Okay, Greg, I'll come to you in a minute. I'm going to now put Claire on the spot and ask her to pass a comment. Claire.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think this touches a bit on what you just said, Laura, and also your comments, Andy, about increasing what we think of as interdisciplinary thinking. I think we need to create incentives for those data collection and quality procedures to take place, right? Because we've talked about different levels of engagement, different areas at which we can collect data at the community level, the intermediate level, the national level, the global level. But we need to think about why people would want to contribute to those systems, who benefits, and what's the benefit to individuals contributing. And so, Laura, to your point about rethinking the global economy, I think that's exactly the right point. We're trying to find opportunities to engage non-traditional stakeholders to make this something that benefits everyone. And in that point, I think it also addresses some really important equity considerations. We know that there have been concerns about how global health security is about protecting the wealthy countries from the ravages of epidemics and not necessarily about strengthening health outcomes in countries where epidemics emerge. So I think we need to flip that on its head and really think about the benefits on a global scale that comes from sharing these predictive and forecasting innovations.
Thank you very much, Claire. Greg.
What I was going to mention was, I think to some level, if we're talking about forecasting too, we don't need to reinvent the wheel too much or jump too far ahead. There's certainly been a lot of experience with, for example, something like NOAA or USGS in terms of making climate forecasts or weather forecasts going seasons ahead. And you don't immediately need to bring everything to the fore with the thought that you might have found something new and be concerned about. And so there are certainly strategies in which we can do kind of low-level surveillance detection that really doesn't cost, and I don't necessarily mean monetarily, but in terms of invasion of privacy that's too extreme, of governmental intrusion that stresses people out to greater or lesser extents, or makes connectivity between countries, more challenging. That there's some relatively low-hanging fruit that can be, I think, brought to bear in an analogous situation, as I said, to what we see with weather forecasting out seasons ahead or a half a year ahead, that might be far more amenable to buy-in from people.
And just a quick comment thanks, Greg, a quick comment from Mary, who's putting her comments in the chat, that the new systems that we've been discussing today will have benefits beyond pandemics. That's right. And, AMR is a clear issue that's, as we focus more and more on viruses, because that's what just happened, we miss perhaps the big event. And that's been done before with H5N1. And then we saw H1N1 in a different region and a different impact. So we've got to be careful. So I'm going to ask Barbara to talk a little bit about, Mark, we'll come to you in a second. So first of all, Barbara, just expand a little bit on some of what you see as the innovative approaches for predictive science that's going on. You've been pushing forward the boundaries quite a lot on this. And what are the cool new techniques for the next decade, and how are we going to get those operationalized? Barbara.
That's a big question, Peter. I think that there are a lot of things we can do immediately to draw better boundaries around that risk. So trying to quantify how much we should be concerned about the risk of zoonosis spilling over in particular regions. And those are using data that aren't necessarily collated very well. Those are data that have been collected for decades that ecologists have been interested in for a very long time. And so that's really just sort of skimming off of the top returns on investment from basic science. These are things like making predictions about what particular species we should be investing our surveillance capacity into, and in what particular regions. For example, regions that the Predict program, Peter, has been invested in looking into for a long time, those key interfaces where we are contacting and seeing more spillovers than we have in other areas. And I think in terms of the innovation, the technological innovation, the interdisciplinary angle, getting students and One Health practitioners trained in being able to learn each other's languages, I guess, and learn each other's cultures in terms of what is an incentive to participate in this kind of an activity. It's not easy to learn each other's languages, particularly when you're talking about interfacing between biology, ecology, and computer science. It is a frontier that I think has huge potential for pushing forward our predictive capacity, particularly when we talk about how we can apply these technologies to understand what, like if you find a sequence, a viral sequence in the wild, how do you know how much to worry about that sequence? We've been detecting beta coronaviruses. EcoHealth Alliance has been a big part of this, detecting beta coronavirus sequences for many years. I think one thing that we should consider is what are the next steps that we can, I guess, cast a vision for. What do we do when we find something that seems like we should be paying attention to? What is the next best step that we take to validate the risk there, to quantify the risk? And what steps are we investing in to continue to make sure that we are not sort of raising the alarm bell too strongly, so overreacting to every sequence that looks like it has similarity to a zoonotic virus, but also not sort of waiting for somebody to pick it up in literature and say, hey, yeah, we knew about this 5 years ago. I wish we'd done something with it. There is a gap there that I feel like there's not a plan for how to behave as a community. And I think that there's this narrative that it's really hard to predict emergence. So maybe we should do the easier thing, which is firefight, because that's on the immediate horizon. I think that there is value, obviously, in fighting the obvious fire, but I think that would be a missed opportunity, to put it lightly, if we don't think ahead to what we're going to do in the next 2 to 3 years for getting better at taking the next steps with these risk quantifications.
That's really good. I appreciate you saying that. And I absolutely see that. There's this constant pushback from people who say, is this money well spent on the predictive approach when we don't really know what these new viruses you find are going to do? And if we don't tackle that, we're never going to actually operationalize this predictive approach to its full extent with the vision that we saw from Seppi and from Jono. Any other thoughts on that? And by the way, I just want to put out, I'm preparing a slide on this, and what we've now got 3 buckets, really. We've got the data collection and use, which various things that need to be done, education and culture, which we heard about from Andy and from Laura, and also on using predictive approaches. How will we persuade governments and organizations to use this? So I just want to go to that last point.
I'd like to make a few comments.
Flush it out. Sorry, Mark, over to you.
Yes. So we do know how to predict genotype to phenotype for some things like antimicrobial resistance. And this starts with good databases where you have a measurement of the phenotype, pathogenicity, or stress, a gene related to stress, or AMR, which is the antibiogram, and the genome. And then you can build rapid tests that say the gene is present. Those exist. NCBI has something called AMR Finder Plus that essentially measures and predicts the known genes. So we can do the known genes. It's much more difficult to do brand new things. And so
that's a good point.
I recommend we use
that brings up the coronavirus issue, which is you can predict to some extent from spike proteins whether infection would happen. But again, it's hard to predict pathology. But Mark, back to you. We're carrying on.
The other issue is the Human Genome Program has for a long time used SNPDB as a reference database to call SNPs of clinical relevance. And so that could be done for any species. And so if you have particular, positions that change the binding receptor or the ACE2 inhibitor, these could be targeted as we see a new variation or we see a new non-synonymous change. So if sequences are sequenced and uploaded in real time, and automated methods are calling the genetic variation for what's known in referenced and curated databases, we at least have some predictions that we can do now.
Brilliant. Claire, do you want to just talk a bit about what you've put in the chat box?
Yeah, really, it's going off what Barbara mentioned and others have alluded to, which is that if we don't link these predictive capabilities to the response efforts, and specifically, at least from my experience, strong health systems, and by that I mean, of course, strong One Health systems, there isn't much point. We can prevent spillover to some extent, but I think we all probably agree that it's going to be increasingly difficult, or it will probably be difficult to stop every spillover event from happening. But what we can do, and we know how to do, is to stop those spillover events from becoming epidemics and then pandemics, and that's through strong health systems. So I think we just need to bear in mind that there is that knowledge translation aspect of ensuring that these capabilities then reach the front lines of the health system and actually serve to have strong health outcomes for the people who are affected.
Oh yeah, absolutely critical point. All this is well and good as we sit in our comfortable home offices and think this through, but how's it going to translate on the ground in the countries that matter? And let's think about COVID, rural China, where wildlife farms and people hunt bats and live lifestyles that have been lived for 5,000 years. They probably don't go to clinics. And if we really want to get to that critical moment and just before it to prevent pandemics, we're going to have to work in resource poor settings. So any thoughts on how that can be done better in a One Health way?
Well, we need to ensure food security. I mean, look, many of these spillover events occur because of what we're doing with either wild or domestic animals. So people need protein. We need to ensure that they get protein to meet their nutritional needs. And we need to do it in an environmentally and ecologically sustainable way. I mean, fundamentally, what's driving these things, and a lot of it is agriculture or the food trade. So you have to look at the root cause if you want to try to reduce the risks that are involved with it.
Brilliant. Any others?
Sorry, I didn't raise my hand. I'm raising it now. I've been keeping up with some of the biosurveillance technology that, the sensor systems that have been, it feels like every week there's a new, really amazing cell phone based or wearables based technology for, that may not be deployable to the same degree across the globe, but I think that it gets us a little closer to a more equitable and overarching surveillance system to catch some of those communities that we haven't traditionally been looking into. So communities that are maybe not exactly at the interface that we're keeping our eyes on, but adjacent to. And I think that some of those technologies are underutilized. We're still operating in sort of a Wild West startup sort of approach where everybody tries to get funding for their cool idea, and some of them stick and some of them don't, but there's no unity. There's no sort of clearinghouse for understanding what we have at our fingertips to deploy now, because we don't have a plan for what we're going to do and what the goals are.
Yeah, we often underestimate the use of technology, even in populations that are on this kind of front line of this. Everyone's got a cell phone in rural China, in rural Southeast Asia. Not everyone, but most people. So I think this is a good point that we maybe underestimate. So I'm just going to quickly share the slide that we've got and hope that we're all in agreement that this is roughly what we've been talking about. If you just bear with me. Oh my God. Yes, here we go. Can you see that okay? So these are your ideas translated into 3 buckets. I've ignored the short term and long term because it's too complicated. So we failed on that, although you did say things. So we talk about data collection and use. We talk about education and culture, really, in different ways and different scales. And we talk about how we're going to use predictive approaches and get them operationalized. A horrible word from a grammar point of view, but it really means something. And I remember going to the Stone Mountain operationalizing One Health meeting maybe 15 years ago, and I can't believe we're still talking about it. But it's because of this issue that people go back to what's safe. I think Barbara said it. You policymakers go back to what's safe, what's comfortable, and what the political budget masters will agree to. So thank you very much for these great ideas. We'll report back. Cheers.